Hey there. So, thought I would talk about loving a mega sabotager. I just heard a reader called Prairie Vintage use the phrase mega sabotager, and I was like, oh, I know some mega sabotagers. And then I thought, wow, I've been actually taught through my spiritual guidance how to address this issue of loving someone who is sabotaging themselves. And I thought, you know, I'm not an expert. I've had some experience, and with this experience, I've come to a place of peace. And I thought that's worth sharing. So that's the perspective that I'm sharing from. If it is a value to you, I'm glad. And maybe I'll learn some things as I express and put some pieces together. So here's the topic. And I don't want to address it just from the side of how to love a mega sabotager. I think I also want to address this thing of like what this sabotager could actually do to change their ways. Like what it would take. Because you may or may not know that. And I won't be sharing it because I think that you should tell them or try to change them, because you can't control other people. But it might help you and be comforting to you to see that there is a way out for them if they choose it, if it comes to that, if they're brought down that path. And I want to say that this is not easy, right? Okay, so I have, I was going to say two major mega sabotagers in my life, but it's actually more than that. There's just two that I really have felt more invested in having a better outcome with. The other ones, I'm like, okay, they're sabotaging themselves and I take space. It's just whatever. I'm taking space. And that's okay. But there are a couple of them in my life where I want those people in my life, yet they are sabotaging. And so what that looks like with one of them, it's like they sabotage any assistance that they get. They sabotage any headway they make. They sabotage solutions that are brought forth to them. They sabotage relationships that are with people who are willing to assist them, and they do seem to need a lot of assistance because they are also sabotaging themselves by not taking very good care of themselves. And this is in the terms of hygiene, safety, shelter, just getting their basic needs met on every level. Okay? And then there's another example of someone in my life who's not that extreme. It's not such an extreme example, but it's an example of a person who just appears to be in the coping mechanisms that are kind of keeping them in a loop of limitation, and they're not able to address that. And so it's like just having a coping mechanism that is harming you more than helping you. And, we have coping mechanisms because we're trying to protect ourselves or deal with a situation in the most effective way that we can with the limited resources or understanding we have when we adopt that coping mechanism. So it becomes unconscious, the fact that we're doing something that's actually harming us, right? So the only thing that will bring it to our attention is that we may notice the pattern, and we may start doing some self-inquiry. We might reflect within ourselves what we could do about changing that pattern or limitation because it's causing harm to ourselves or others. And when we notice that, then that's the first step of being able to change. But sometimes people will notice it and know it and still not have what it takes to make the changes. And so in the research that Dr. Bruce Lipton presents in many of his talks, and if you're not familiar with him, I suggest looking him up on YouTube, doing a little deep dive into the things that he's shared, because he's sharing about epigenetics. And he shared in his research this example which stands out right now, and it's that he says, okay, so basically, let me back up. Children are primed for their environment. So how the mother feels about themselves will affect how the child is wired. Will they be wired for love or fear? You know, if the mother is suffering from low self-worth, there's going to be more fear-based connections made in the infant. And this does affect how they are going to experience their environment and their lives. And so if you are born into a family where there's self-esteem issues, where there's addictions, where there's lack of connection, where there's dysfunctional relating, where there's just a lack in general of resources, then it is much more likely that would be set up with a belief that you are not good enough. And so the example that Bruce Lipton used in one of his talks of how that might look is that, say you're running a race and you're about to win, and instead, right at the very last minute, you trip so that you don't win the race. And it's actually your subconscious causing you to trip because your subconscious has the program that you are not good enough. So the subconscious is taking over to create the reality because the beliefs are what you end up living out. So if the subconscious believes that you're not good enough, even if your conscious mind thinks that you are, even if your conscious mind knows that you deserve to win, if the subconscious belief is stronger due to the environment you grew up in, due to the people that you were surrounded with, the examples that you had, and the wiring you got neurologically for how to navigate this world, you'll be more inclined to sabotage yourself. And that is just one example with running the race. This happens over and over in life. Anytime you're about to succeed, you'll sabotage yourself in some way because the subconscious belief is being activated. And your life will reflect your beliefs. It will. So it's worth noticing what you believe and changing the beliefs that are limiting you. And you can tell what you believe by looking at your life and seeing what you're living. And you can also look around at your family and see the lives they're living and what challenges they've been experiencing and things like that to give you clues about what the beliefs are in the family and how they may be limiting you. Like, for instance, beliefs about money being the root of all evil and things like that might keep you from being wealthy, even though you're trying to do that. And it could be something in your subconscious, so you may not be aware of it, but maybe you heard Grandpa say that, and everyone was in agreement at the dinner table, and so you have subconsciously adopted that as your belief. You know, it's worth some self-inquiry to figure out what our limitation is with regards to our beliefs when we know that this is the case. And if we know we've grown up in dysfunctional relating patterns in a family home that wasn't healthy, that was full of lack, then we know that we're going to have some subconscious programming that is going to limit us. It's how humans work, because up until the age of 7, we're in the theta phase. It's a phase of our brain waves, and that causes us to download from our environment in order to survive in the environment we're in. So it's part of how the biology works. And knowing that is important when it comes to trying to live the life you want to live, because if you don't address the subconscious beliefs, then you're going to be sabotaging yourself all along the way. And you may get very frustrated, you may give up. And you see a lot of people have, given up, and maybe they don't know that it's literally because they didn't know they could change their belief. They were limited by the beliefs. And if they don't ever know that they can change them, then they're going to think that they have to live that way. And they're going to think life isn't fair and all that kind of stuff. So it's worth taking note and learning about what your beliefs are. It's worth self-reflection and self-inquiry and all this kind of stuff. And it's pretty average and normal for those who have grown up in this lack paradigm of there's not enough, I'm not enough, to have a self-sabotaging program and other programs of limitation for achieving, for being happy, for various whatever things, whether or not they can have a successful relationship, whether or not it's safe to love, whether or not it's safe to step out of line or be noticed or be doubted or, express yourself, express a contrary opinion. All of this stuff could be pre-programmed in, and it could limit you, and you could end up sabotaging yourself even when you decide that you want to do something else. And Bruce Lipton also offers this as an example of when the conscious mind is the most active and we're not falling back into the subconscious mind's patterns, we can create a level of success for ourselves. But as soon as we get comfortable in that routine, we may fall back into the subconscious, because the subconscious will take in the beliefs that we've just kept on thinking. So that's why, establishing a new habit, it takes time, it takes repetition, it takes training yourself to create the belief that you can do that. And if you do it for some time with your conscious mind and your force of will, you can do that for a period of time and still not have it programmed into you. And you can still default back to your subconscious programming if it wasn't addressed. Sometimes there's some hidden benefit of staying in that status quo that you have originally been programmed with. But I just think it's worth noting that, when you're in your conscious mind, when you're consciously being on your best behavior, sure, in those cases it is possible to override that self-sabotage. But as soon as you go back into your sort of like automatic way of living, so like have you ever noticed that when you're driving along, sometimes you can get to your destination and you're like, wait a minute, I wasn't even paying attention, I just got here. And it's because your subconscious knows how to drive. You can go onto autopilot on a lot of things, and that's your programming, right? Your programming allows you to go on autopilot. Like you don't have to consciously breathe. Your program breathes for you. You don't have to think it consciously. But if you do think consciously about breathing, then you can control it, right? So the more conscious and present you are, the more control you have over this. Now, some people, I've heard them talk about how all it takes is to just stay in presence and to stay conscious. And then you can control your reality from there. And it's contrary to what I've been focused on, which is to reprogram my subconscious. When I talk about shadow work, it's really about illuminating what programs I have in my subconscious so that I can make the changes that I want to. And that's because besides the conscious mind and the presence and what you desire and want, you also have your soul's intentions here on earth. So your soul came in to have this itinerary unfold for you. And some of that itinerary likely includes some of the programming and limitations that you will experience. So I was working on that level in order to honor those things that are experiences that I needed to have. Also, I don't really think I had the ability to stay that present because I had such pervasive, limiting, reactionary loops of energy happening. Like, it was sort of like there were so many programs running in me that were trying to protect me that I could easily be triggered into one of them, and that was a automatic loop of reaction. So it wasn't conscious either. It was just happening from my subconscious that decided this is the way we have to act when that happens so that we protect ourselves. And then it took me using my conscious mind to notice it and to look at it and to then integrate it into myself. And that's because I am going to utilize the experiences I've had in order to create what I want here on earth, right? So it's not a matter of me just trying to like outrun it and stay above it, because I think it would be near impossible to do that on a full-time basis if you have not addressed what's in your shadow, I believe. Because it's sort of like your itinerary of what you're here to do on earth. Like what would you be doing? Maybe some people have come here without that backlog of things to clean up, without a childhood to recover from. And maybe they're just jumping in here to just start to create. And that's wonderful, because those people probably have a really good chance of creating things that will not harm our Mother Earth and everybody else. That those people would have a good chance of being conscious because they're not living in lack, and their desires are not born from trying to survive without enough. Because if you believe there's enough, then there's enough. If you believe there's not enough, then there's not enough. It's like that. So it's worth paying attention to what you believe. And it's also worth understanding that you've likely been programmed with limitation and potentially a self-sabotaging program, a program that will cause you to sabotage yourself so that you cannot complete what you may want to because you have an overriding belief that says that you're not worth it, that you're not good enough, that it can't happen for you, that it wouldn't be safe for it to happen, whatever it may be. It's going to be tied directly to what the belief is that's anchoring it in. Okay, and it could have been learned by an example in your environment, or it could have been learned by being told it, or it could have been learned by just a misunderstanding you had about how to navigate given the circumstances you were in. And I say misunderstanding, I'll use that loosely because, you had the understanding that you were meant to have. And then when you finally look at it again, it might look like a misunderstanding when you look at the truth of it, when you pick it apart a little bit and go, oh, yeah, I concluded this, but it's actually not that, Okay. So when it comes to sabotage, and we've talked a little bit about how that happens and what it looks like and how it's completely unconscious for most people that are dealing with it until they do know that it is a thing. So you look at people in your life as you might be doing the work for yourself, and then you're still like having relationship with people who are actively sabotaging themselves. And this, from my experience, I can tell you, even though I had done all this work on myself, and even though I was in the practice of looking back at myself for the reflection that I was being shown off of what I saw outside of me, it came to a point where it was like, well, I know I'm not that. I know I'm not doing that. I know I'm not that. So what is it that's being shown to me? And what was being shown to me is my difficulty with being okay with them doing that. You know, what it showed me is these parts of me that wanted to rescue and save and spare them and and sort of like teach them and make it all better, and not allow the suffering to go on. And that seems really natural when we look at ourselves in terms of being kind beings, soft beings, empathetic beings who care about people. Like, it makes sense that you don't want others to suffer. But I learned that in my process, like, it wasn't like I could just tell them, like I just shared here, oh, if you just knew this, this, and this, then you'd change that. I couldn't, they weren't receptive to it, right? Like, to them, it just sounds like a bunch of gibberish that is not relevant to them. Because especially with their coping mechanisms, the ego is set up to reject things that will break it down, you know? So sometimes the coping mechanism has a built-in way of rejecting any outside input about that topic. And so it's really does have to be inspired from within a person to want to change their self-sabotage. But say you love somebody and you don't want to see them sink all the way down to the bottom, or you've seen them sink down all the way to the bottom, but you don't want them to die. It could be like that. Or you'd like to be having a relationship with somebody, but it's very difficult because every time you have them in your sphere, you're always having to clean up a mess, or they don't treat you right because they're sabotaging, or whatever it may be, or they're just living a lifestyle that doesn't feel right to you, so you can't spend time with them without sacrificing, because their lifestyle requires sacrifice, because they're sacrificing their own health or their own time or whatever it is with any unhealthy or addictive or whatever coping mechanisms. So depending on the extreme of how they're doing this, right? I just gave an example from death to just annoying, from death to just, I want to spend more time with you, but I can't. And it's like, depending on what the relationship is and, what role this person has in your life, I found it very, very challenging, especially with the person that I felt like was at risk of really, really harming or not protecting their own life. Because I didn't understand, where is the line? How much am I supposed to sacrifice? What can't, like, being an example isn't enough, because when I'm an example of another choice, all they do is lash out at me, and they don't, respect it, and they don't want to see it, and they kind of try to cut me down. But all along the way, each time things like that happened, I did address whatever in me made me susceptible to it. And I found things like my willingness to sacrifice too much of myself. I found things like my fear that I would be negatively affected. And like, once I eliminated those kind of things, like when I knew that I didn't have to be in fear, even if this person was yelling or lashing out, the dynamic changed immediately, because there was no more weakness in my energy that was in fear when I knew that I had my own back, and that this person wasn't going to hurt me, even if they were going to punch me. I was not going to stand in fear, when I was going to face them. It changed the dynamic, and they backed off. So all along the way, even though it was a very difficult situation, and even though a lot of people would say, don't subject yourself to abusive people, you can go in the other direction, and I also considered that, I did find that even those situations had something for me to heal within myself. Now, I may be in particular an example that you cannot relate to, because in my lifetime, I did grow up in violence. So I still had fears around violence to clean up in me. That program was shown to me when I faced somebody who made me fear that. So if you don't have anything like that, maybe you're not experiencing anything like that, right? And I'm not here to say that it's the wrong thing if you're taking space or going away or never even addressing another person like that, because I respect that as well. And I think that there was part of me that came across people saying, if people are like that, you just cut them off and run. And trust me, I grappled with that idea too. And I did take space at times. And I wondered if I was doing the wrong thing by staying in contact. And I had to rely heavily on my guidance through my oracle, through my intuition, through astrology charts. And I just, I'm so thankful for those things, because it got me through to where I am now. And it was, in retrospect, what I could say is maybe it was like I was having this master class in dysfunction, in cleaning up dysfunction and in dealing with dysfunction, right? Because I was learning a lot of things that could help me in any situation where I was dealing with somebody who was kind of out of control, a bit reckless and maybe selfish and, and also like self-sabotaging. And so I'm not saying that I recommend sticking it out if you don't feel like you should. This is all, you make your own decisions and you're responsible for them. I'm not advising, okay? I just want to be clear on that. But I felt like I don't know where the line is. So I would go to my cards and then I would get reassurance that I should stick with it. And without that reassurance to stick with it at times, I probably would have given up. And I probably would have been in limbo back and forth, like which is the right thing to do? I don't know, because at times it was really hard to see any progress. And it was like one step forward, two steps back at times. And so even though I would see a change in the dynamic due to me cleaning up something in my vibration, sometimes it would regress again. And it would be like, okay, well, now what? I thought we were moving in one direction. All my guidance said that, don't worry, this is worth putting your investment into. So like, shouldn't we be making some progress? Things like that. And then I realized like, okay, well, here's something that I can learn is like, I'm not in faith if it wavers. If I'm wavering, then I'm not in faith. Now am I? So do I have faith or not? And I've already been through a lot of examples and experiences in life that allow me to know that faith can move mountains. If I can be in faith on a topic, then, no worries, honestly, because it's going to turn out in the highest good of all. And I don't know what that means, right? It really could mean that someone passes on. It could mean that. But if that's what's in the highest good of all, if that's what's meant to happen, if that's what's going to happen, what good would it be for me to suffer through the whole thing, fighting against it, wishing it was different, and begging for God and throwing myself under the bus over and over again? It wouldn't. So it taught me, okay, faith is my safe place. And faith is going to require me to surrender this need to control or rescue or make it look a certain way, or need it to look a certain way, like in the way of results, All of that kind of stuff came up. And I think when I got to that point, it was a bit easier to kind of look at it in terms of a little bit more detached and a little bit bigger picture. Because if I look at my own life and all the things that I suffered through, went through, and I definitely had self-sabotage programming from my whole life, from the household that I grew up in. I was trained to self-sabotage. And I had to overcome that. So before I did, I sabotaged myself a lot. I was in a lot of really risky, unsafe situations. I harmed myself a lot. And I survived. I made it through. I was okay, And so I have to allow that for the other person as well, right? Like God, angels, guides, ancestors, earth angels, I got through with the powers that be. And I have to allow that for that person too, right? Their soul is here learning some things just like I came to learn some things. And now when you are going through this journey of like self-healing or understanding yourself, getting to know yourself, and kind of integrating all of your shadow, you come out the other side not resenting what got you here. Like there's no part of me that's like, oh, poor me that I went through that, or oh, I had a, terrible time and it wasn't fair. Nothing like that. Because I've dealt with all these major themes of tragedy and suffering from my past, I've gotten to a point where I can, I've extracted gold from the situation. I can see how I've learned something that I needed to know from that situation. I can see how that helped me learn more about myself and other people, and helped me readjust my expectations, and then eventually realize that I don't want to have expectations of other people, that I can't control other people, and that I am fine, that I'm okay, that it's worth looking at the beliefs that make me feel like I'm not okay, to release those so that I can return to my peace, and then just like live in peace. I've worked to release all the programming that disallows me to live in peace. And if another one comes up to my awareness, I will work through that as well. And I've taken the opportunity to learn what I can from each thing all along the way. So it makes sense for me, because I've done that, to apply that also to them. And it's like, okay, they also have that capacity. So this just allows my mind to relax a little bit more, and to surrender a little bit more, and to know that I don't have to step in. Like, it doesn't mean that I never help. It doesn't mean that I have no compassion. It doesn't mean that I shut my heart down. I'm not saying that at all. I'm saying that I put it in a perspective of understanding that this person's going through a process, and it's a process they apparently have to go through. How do I know? Because they're going through it. Yeah, they might take some damage, but they're going to get through it, right? Sometimes we take some damage. I know that I just smiled right then. I know this because I have missing teeth, right? I took some damage. And this is directly tied to how I was living my life, the beliefs I had, the situations that I kept myself in, the self-sabotage, all of that, ties to it. Okay, so with that in mind, now I look at the other, and I'm allowing for them to have their process, right? But I also need to know that I'm not going to be disrespecting myself in the process of contributing anything that I do feel inspired to contribute in the way of assistance or help or whatever, to somebody who I care about and who is in suffering and who may sabotage their way through any assistance that I even give, and who may turn against any help that they're given because the self-sabotage is so strong. And the only kind of thing that I can do is is clear up the things in me that it's showing me about me, and then work towards that surrender and allowing for them to have their process as they must, just like I had to. And they're not on my timeline. Like, they don't have to meet some criteria of having certain amount of progress by a certain amount of time, because that's not mine to dictate. So what I have to do is find out where my capacity is on what I can give healthily without harming me. So I fill up my own cup. Hey there. So, oddly, I've been having technical difficulties whenever I get onto a certain topic in the last 2 days. So it's not time for me to talk about the certain topic. And as a result, you just saw me get cut off mid-sentence. And there was a whole another half hour of that video, but we're just going to go with this. So I'm not going to address the side of what you can do when you're self-sabotaging. I may have addressed it in various other videos. You can follow the formula that I mention in almost all of my videos. Acknowledge, validate, accept, and be present. When you're self-sabotaging, look for the hidden benefit of why you're doing it, things like that, okay? Other than that, I'm gonna just leave the video as it is, which I believe got the gist of what I was saying about how I have learned to deal with loving someone who is in self-sabotage. And in case I didn't clarify, I sort of reframed, and where I might have been labeling them a mega self-sabotager, I took that back and I corrected myself to say that this would be just a person who is exhibiting the behavior of major self-sabotage. I don't want to label them that, that wouldn't be kind or right. So I will say that, and just in case, because I'm not sure how far I got in this video when I got cut off, but I will find out in a minute. But just in case, I'm going to just reiterate, which is my understanding of how I came to peace, even though I love someone who was in heavily self-sabotaging, was to work on anything in me that got highlighted through the process of interacting with them. Surrender, knowing that I can't control the situation and it is what it is. Understand that they too are learning, just like I've had to learn, and that they might be going through difficult processes, and it might be difficult to see them go through those processes, but that God, universe, process, their own spirit has them, just the way mine had me. And that it's important for me to put myself in the equation, meaning to not sacrifice too much of myself when I go to assist this person with anything. So meaning not agreeing to throw myself under the bus repeatedly, or making sure I understand that if this always happens when I do that, and I don't like that I don't want to keep putting myself in that kind of position. Like, I learn and understand where the limits are, right? And by doing this, I have been able to come back into peace. And it took me a long time. It took a lot of self-inquiry in the beginning, and then just heavy surrender, and also just reassurance from my guidance, my cards, my oracle, my highest self, my intuition, that this is the experience that I'm meant to have, that yes, it's difficult, but I am learning something that I wouldn't have otherwise learned. In fact, I know I'm learning a lot of things that I wouldn't have otherwise learned. So I've been willing to go through it. And in case I got cut off before I said so, I just want to say that if you are in an abusive situation with somebody who's self-sabotaging, I'm not by any means saying that you should stay engaged in the process, okay? Just because I understood that I was meant to does not mean that I am deciding that as a universal truth for everybody by any means. You have to take responsibility for the choices you make within the situation, and that's really what it comes down to. So I just happened to turn to my guidance for the advice because I didn't know what choice to make. And I was really grappling between, should I stay involved? Should I take more space? It was really, really painful. But what I found was each time I was in pain, I addressed that within myself and then alleviated it. So the process actually showed me a lot of my own weaknesses that were due to the way that I grew up with abusive people and people who are self-sabotaging, and wounds that you have from actually watching people that you love and depend on sabotage you and them, for your whole upbringing. It's like If you are dealing with somebody who's heavily in self-sabotaging ways, maybe you're being given an opportunity to heal all the wounding that happened to you when you grew up that way. It could be because I found that I was able to find anchored wounding patterns within me due to how I was, reacting to the situation. And as I healed those, the situation changed, but it didn't like immediately get to where I wanted it to be. It's just an in process thing. And I'm just like in the process. And in the process, I was guided to surrender and to give it to God, give it to universe, give it to higher power kind of thing. And also to understand that this person is going through a process and no, it might not look pretty. And that doesn't mean it's wrong. And also that it is my duty to make sure that I'm not sacrificing myself too much, that I am not putting myself into a situation where I don't agree to being in it, And when I do agree to being in it, I do it wholeheartedly without expectations and without attachment to the outcome. I do it because it was the most interesting or passionately driven or intuitively guided thing for me to do in that moment. So just taking action where I'm intuitively guided and not being attached to what that outcome is or would or expecting of the other. It's really just kind of allowing for the other to have their process of learning and growing, but also, making sure that you're tending to your own process of learning and growing for any opportunity that you get throughout that. Because anytime there is this difficult pattern within yourself and you're being highlighted in it, that's an opportunity for you to heal and rectify and release any stuck stuff in you with regard to it. So that is how I found my way to peace in this difficult situation. And it's not, I'm not saying I'm glad for it or anything like that. I don't fight against what is anymore. It is what it is, It is what it is. I don't make the rules for every soul that's around me. I just choose to love. And to love is to manage myself and to allow them their process and to make sure that I'm not harming myself or others. That's what it is for me. Okay, so you decide what it is for you. If you have anything to add, comments, questions, if it seems like I've left something in the middle of a point and never made it to my point, it could be because the video got shut off. So just let me know and I will finish my point if it's important to you. Okay? Okay.